Hello everyone, in today's video we will be creating our first superpower. Personally, I always like having some abilities in games, whether you call them magic or superpowers. Our ability will drain mana over time and stop when our mana is depleted. It will also slowly regenerate over time. In order to create this, we will need Unity, Game Creator and the Stats module. For the purpose of this tutorial, I will also be using the Shooter or Melee module for our triggers. What I'll be showing is one of the ways things can be done, but obviously it can be done in many different ways. So let's dive in. So before setting up our scene, I'm going to show the end result of today's tutorial. So we'll be creating a superpower that is time related, so it's basically slow motion, but our player will be able to move slightly faster. Now, as you can see in the top right corner, our mana bar slowly regenerates over time. We want our ability to be tied to mana, otherwise you could just spam it and that's no fun really. But I also wanted the player to be able to move a bit faster, because normal slow motion just slows everything down, and well, it's not really an ability if just, you slow down as well. So let's hit the key, and as you can see, our player moves faster, our mana bar depletes, and our player is still quite fast. And then once it hits a certain value, it stops. Now I did this at 5, which might be a bit exaggerated, but you can set whatever value you want, and everything goes back to normal. Now if we hit the key again, we're able to use our ability again. And we move fast, but the AI moves at a much slower pace. Cool, so let's set up our scene. Now for the purpose of this tutorial, I will be reusing the advanced player controller scene I set up, simply because this already has a player UI. Now if you don't have a player UI, please watch that video. If you already have your own player UI, that's great as well, then you can just use that. But if you simply have the advanced player UI I use, advanced player controller I use, then duplicate that scene and we'll get started. So let's call this 01 tutorial power 1. Now power 1 indicates there will be more, and there definitely will be more. I just thought slow motion would be a fun first power to set up, but with a few twists. So as you can see, our image changes as well, so there's some post-processing going on, and our player still retains faster movement. Now the first thing we'll do is we'll actually add our mana bar to the user interface. So let's go to player UI, switch to 2D, and let's go to the health bar. Now we'll be using the health bar simply because the mana bar is basically exactly the same. So we're going to duplicate this. Now I'm going to rename it to power background. There we go. And I want to make sure all these layers have the same. So power delay and power bar. Obviously you can rename it to whatever you want. I'm just going to keep it like this for now. Then we're going to move it to the other corner. Again, you can place it somewhere else. It doesn't really matter where you place it, as long as it's visible. And let's add an image to it as well. There we go. Now I have a sprite that basically shows, you know, power icon, but you can use whatever icon you want. So there we have it. Now we need to change one small detail here. This needs to be set to mana instead of health. Cool. Now all of these other values are by default set because we duplicated it. And now in our UI we need to add another attribute component which will track mana. And we need to drag in the same values, but this time for our power bar. So let's drag in our power bar twice, and there we go. Now if we hit play, I need to turn off that start, but anyway, if we hit play, you will see that our mana value is set. Now by default in the stats component, which I'll show in a bit, mana is set to 25, so that's why the value is that low. You can obviously change this to some other value. I'm fine with 25. It's going to regenerate over time anyway, so I think that's an okay value. So that's really it for the UI part of this. So we have our value set up, all great. Now we have to set up the rest. So we need to set up what is actually going to happen. Now, just to show you where the mana is drawn from, so in your player, the stats module will have health and it will have mana. So yeah, that's where the value comes from. Now I already had a on start trigger, so on start it will trigger that camera action. So I'm just going to add a new action here, you know, which will work, and in this action we're going to add our mana over time. So let's make this a small value, wait a small amount of time, and restart this action. So that's it. Over time, we'll now have our mana regenerate. Really simple. You can do the same with health, even if you want health regeneration. Just, you know, basically do the exact same, but for health. It's really that simple. Now next up, we are going to set up our player. So it needs to activate somehow. Now you don't need to put this trigger on the player. I like to have all of my player actions, now I'm typing in player actions. I like to have all of my player actions just, you know, grouped together. So we'll do this on key up as well. I'm going to use 5 on the keypad. I know not a single game actually uses the keypad, I'm sure, but it's just easy, far apart from everything else. And we're going to call some conditions. So let's open up these conditions. Now in these conditions we need to set that over time we'll draw that mana away, but also we need to set a stop for when it you know, no longer works basically. So let's just get added. So attribute value again will take mana. So if it's greater or equal to, now I did 5, you can lower this value, but I'll just keep it at 5. If at 5, our slow motion will start. So we're gonna use time scale. Now if you've seen my tutorial on the pause menus, for example, the advanced UI, you will know exactly what time scale does. So basically 1 is default, so time is normal, 0 literally pauses the game, and 0.5 would then obviously slow it. You can set it to whatever value between 0 and 1. The closer to 1, the faster it will be, etc. Now, I want my player to be faster during slow motion. So 5 is the default value. I'm going to increase it to 10. I'm simply doing this because I don't think it's fun if you move at the same speed as the enemy. It's not really a superpower in that case, because you'll move in the same at the same speed. So at the end of this, we would call our effects as well, and we would call something else to happen. I'm going to skip that for now. Just wanted to set up the basics. But if value is not greater or equal to 5, then what's going to happen? Everything's going to basically set back. So let's just copy these values. Goes back to 1. Our player run speed goes back to 5. Make sure you do this, otherwise you'll just remain really fast. Now I'm going to set up our slow motion FX because I think it's fun. Slow motion actually looks slightly different. So we're gonna create this empty. Now if you've seen the player advanced player controller tutorial, or I think just that one actually, we've set up post-processing before. This is going to be really similar, so we'll call it slow motion. Now there's two ways of adding a post-process volume. I'm using HDRP, so I have to use this one. If you do not use HDRP, then you have this one. Now if you do not see this, you have to make sure that in Package Manager, post-processing is actually installed. There we go. Post-processing, there we go. So yeah, just install this. Anyway, going back to this one, I'm going to create a new value. And we're going to add our first visual effect. So let's add motion blur. There we go. Now it could be you already use motion blur for something else, like by default, for example. Then your values might have to be different. I'm just going to use this. Again, play around with these values, especially motion blur, because depending on the graphical settings, it might look different. Now lens distortion is the same for everyone. I'm going to have this. So in game you can already see it distorts. So this is how it is normally, and this is what lens distortion does. Now if you would do it the other way around, it would look like this, which is not what I want to achieve, but if you prefer that, then go ahead. Going to add some bloom as well. Kind of, I don't know if you've seen time effects in several games, but it always adds some bloomy effect. I'm going to set it to 0. Obviously I knew this value in advance. You can change the value to something else. You can entirely skip this. Whatever you want. I'm going to do this. Again, this is all personal. If you prefer a different type of tint, you don't want bloom at all, go ahead, do whatever you want. This is just what I'm using. There we go. So we have bloom, and that's it really. Those are the post-processing effects I'll be using. Again, you can add, you know, many others. Now we need to make sure by default this is disabled, and we're going to add one more set of actions. I'm pretty sure we can do it like this as well. Yeah, there we go. Now this set of actions, let's going to drag it into the conditions just to have it grouped together. This set of actions will call out the actual drawing of mana. So player mana subtract, and we're going to subtract 0.5. Now if you recall, we added 0.1 by default for regeneration, so basically it will use 0.4 over time. I'm going to set the same time value, so yeah, it will use more than it regenerates. That's the point, obviously. Otherwise this wouldn't really matter that much. But the great thing here is you can obviously have buffs, for example, that will you know, change these values, so you know, you could last longer in, you know, in your slow motion state. Now I'm going to call these values instead of doing restart, because I wanted to constantly check if we're at this value, yes or no. If we're not, then it's just simply going to repeat. Now we need to add it here as well, and we set up our slow motion effect. So let's add both of those values. Now we're going to do a set active. We're going to activate our slow motion if we have more than 5 mana. If we have less than 5 mana, we are obviously going to deactivate it. And lastly, we're going to add our actions. I think it was execute actions. Yeah, there we go. And this will set wait to finish. So basically, we want this to finish because it's going to recall these actions in a loop and just basically loop through this. But we need to make sure it actually you know, checks if our mana is higher than 5. Now it's really important that I've, you know, played around with it a bit, that the actions for regeneration are not grouped in here. It creates a mess, so that's why I have it completely separate. Now let's see what actually happens. There we go. We have our mana bar slowly regenerating, which is great. Then we're going to hit 5 and our mana decreases. Yeah, great. We're still running faster, and it stops because our mana depleted and it slowly regenerates again. If I hit 5 again, it will work again, and as you can see, we move a lot faster than he does. Perfect. Now, as a finishing touch, what I added to our slow motion here is a audio source. There we go. Which had, dear God, I can't remember which audio file it was. I think it was debuff. I hope it was this one. But anyway, if it's not, then fine, it will just sound different. But yeah, you can add that. So add that to the slow motion post-processing volume we set up, because basically by default it will play on awake. This is one we're going to activate and deactivate, so it will always just automatically be synced with, you know, using the powers. So let's give this that one last go. There we are. Now I'm going to grab a gun, make this a fair fight. And there we are. And obviously in slow motion it's not a fair fight. But anyway, so that's it really. That's how easy it is to set up a first superpower. Now I know slow motion might not be the most exciting, but it is one we see a lot. Wanted to change some things so to make it slightly more interesting, add some visual effects, and there we go. So hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.